He never planned to buy anyone. That thought stayed heavy in his mind even years later. On that day, he had only gone out because the rain refused to stop and his small apartment felt too quiet. He was the kind of man who lived carefully, worked long hours, and avoided trouble. His life was simple, predictable, and lonely in a way he had learned to accept. While walking through the older part of the city, he noticed a building he had never seen before. It looked official, clean, and guarded, not dark or secretive like the rumors he had once heard. A sign near the door explained that it was a licensed relocation and rescue exchange for rare non-human citizens. Everything was legal, regulated, and monitored. Still, something about it made his stomach tighten. Curiosity pulled him inside. The hall was quiet, filled with soft lights and calm voices. People stood in small groups, reading digital boards and documents. There were no raised voices, no chaos. Yet the feeling in the air was heavy. Each glass enclosure held someone different. Some looked confident, some distant, some tired. None of them spoke. Then he saw her. She stood near the back, separated from the others. Her fox-like features were impossible to miss soft orange fur. Tall ears that twitched at every sound, and a long tail curled tightly around her leg. She was taller than most women, but her posture made her seem smaller. Her eyes were sharp but guarded, watching every movement in the room as if she expected something bad to happen at any moment. He stopped walking without realizing it. The screen beside her enclosure listed basic information. No personal history. No family connections. Classified as unassigned. The notes mentioned prior transfers and failed placements. Nothing more. He felt uncomfortable reading it, like he was invading something private. A staff member noticed him and approached calmly. She explained the process in a neutral voice. Some individuals here had no legal sponsor. Without one, they would continue moving through the system, sometimes ending up in places that cared more about labor than well-being. The words were polite, but the meaning was clear. He looked back at the Vulpine woman. She had noticed him now. Their eyes met for a brief second before she looked away, lowering her head. That single motion struck him harder than he expected. He told himself to leave. This was not his problem. He barely managed his own life. He had no training, no experience, no plan. But as he turned toward the exit, another group entered, laughing softly, pointing at enclosures like they were choosing furniture. His chest tightened. He turned back. When the staff member asked if he had questions, his voice surprised him. He asked what would happen to her if no one stepped forward. The answer was careful, but honest. She would be reassigned. There was no promise where. That was the moment he made the decision. The process was fast, but serious. Documents were explained line by line. Responsibilities were clear. He was not buying a servant or an object. He was accepting legal guardianship, housing responsibility, and personal safety obligations. Still, the word purchase sat on the page, and it made his hands shake as he signed. When it was done, the enclosure opened. She did not step out right away. The staff member spoke to her gently, explaining that she was being relocated to a private residence under protection. The Vulpine woman nodded slowly, her ears lowered. She walked toward him with careful steps, stopping a few feet away. Up close, he noticed faint scars along her arms and hands. Not fresh, but not forgotten either. She bowed her head deeply. "Thank you for choosing me," she said quietly. The words made his chest ache. He didn't know why. The ride home was silent. She sat straight in the passenger seat, hands folded, eyes fixed forward. Every time the car stopped, her tail tightened around her leg. He wanted to say something, anything, but the wrong words felt dangerous. So he stayed quiet, letting her breathe. When they reached his apartment, he showed her inside and immediately apologized for the size. It was clean but small, filled with books and simple furniture. He pointed out the bathroom, the kitchen, finally the spare room he had cleared earlier that afternoon without realizing why. "This room is yours," he said. "You can lock the door if you want." She looked confused. "I will sleep wherever you command," she replied. He froze. "No," he said quickly, then softened his tone. "You don't have to do anything like that. This is your room, your space. She stared at him as if he had spoken a foreign language. He gave her clean clothes, food, and water, then stepped back, keeping his distance. He told her there were no rules yet, no expectations. She could rest. He would answer questions later. That night, he barely slept. He kept thinking about her words. "Thank you for choosing me," as if she had been waiting for someone to decide her worth. The thought made him uneasy. He had saved her from something? Maybe. But he had also stepped into a role he did not fully understand. In the early morning, he heard movement in the kitchen. When he entered, he found her cleaning the counter with careful precision. "You don't need to do that," he said gently. She stopped immediately and bowed her head. "I wish to be useful." Something about the way she said it felt heavy, like a rule carved deep inside her. He realized then that whatever her past was, it had taught her that value came only from service, and that scared him more than the auction ever had. He sat down across from her and spoke slowly, choosing each word with care. "You are safe here. You are not required to earn your place." She looked at him, eyes wide, searching his face for hidden meaning. "For now," he added, "just rest." "That's enough." She nodded, but he could tell she did not fully believe him. As the sun rose through the window, he understood that this decision would change both of their lives. He had thought he was preventing harm. Instead, he had opened a door into someone else's broken world, and now he carried the responsibility to make sure. It did not break her again. This was only the beginning. The days after her arrival were quiet but tense. He gave her space, as he promised, but the tension in the apartment was impossible to ignore. She rarely spoke, and when she did, her words were short and careful, as if she had been trained to speak only when necessary. Every movement she made was precise, cautious, and measured. She seemed to be watching him constantly, her large amber eyes flicking toward him whenever he moved. Sometimes, when she thought he wasn't looking, she would glance toward the door as if preparing to escape at a moment's notice. He did not push her. He understood that trust could not be forced. Instead, he focused on the small things, providing her food, ensuring she had clothes she liked, and giving her a room where she could retreat when she felt overwhelmed. Her space was simple but warm, with soft blankets and a few books he thought she might enjoy. He avoided crowding her, keeping to his own side of the apartment, quietly observing when she was comfortable enough to explore the new environment. Despite the calm, there was an undercurrent of fear in her. She flinched at sudden movements, jumped slightly at loud noises, and often held her tail tightly curled around her legs. The man began to realize that her obedience and carefulness were not habits formed overnight. They were survival skills etched into her from a past full of unpredictability and danger. One morning while making breakfast, he noticed her standing silently in the doorway, watching him. She did not ask for anything. She did not move closer. She simply observed. He turned to her with a smile, trying to create warmth in the quiet room. "Do you want some?" he asked, holding out a plate of pancakes. She shook her head slowly, her ears lowering in hesitation. "I do not eat before you say it is acceptable," she said softly. Her voice was gentle, almost musical, but carried a strange weight that made him pause. "No," he said firmly. "You eat when you want. You do not need my permission." She tilted her head, studying him as if trying to understand whether he was serious. After a long moment, she stepped forward and took the plate carefully, as if moving too quickly might break some invisible rule. She sat down at the small kitchen table and ate in silence. He watched her, feeling a strange mix of admiration and sadness. She wanted to serve, but he wanted her to understand that she could exist freely. Days turned into a week, and a pattern emerged. She would follow him around quietly, helping with chores, but always waiting for direction. She cleaned, organized, and even attempted cooking simple meals, though he noticed she avoided adding anything beyond what he instructed. Sometimes she would pause mid-task and look at him, as if asking permission without words. One afternoon, while he was reading in the living room, she approached him with a small tray of tea. Her movements were careful, deliberate, almost ceremonial. "I thought you might like tea," she said softly, placing the tray beside him. He smiled gently. Thank you, but you don't need to do this for me. Her ears twitched, and her eyes met his. I wish to be useful, she replied simply. He sighed, realizing how deeply this idea of usefulness was ingrained in her. She did not yet understand that usefulness could come from living freely, from choosing her own path, from simply existing without fear or obligation. Over the next few days, he tried to introduce small choices. Do you want to read a book or take a walk today? He would ask. She would pause, considering, then nod slowly, as if surprised that someone was giving her the chance to decide. Some days she chose the walk. Other days, she preferred the book. Each choice seemed to give her a small spark of confidence, though she quickly masked it with her usual careful demeanor. Evening brought its own challenges. She struggled to relax, often sitting in her room with her back straight, hands folded, waiting for a command that would never come. He tried talking to her about rest, explaining that she did not need to earn it. You are allowed to sleep whenever you wish, said one night, sitting on the edge of her bed. Her ears twitched nervously. Sleeping without permission feels wrong, she admitted quietly. He chuckled softly, shaking his head. It only feels wrong because someone made you believe that. But here, you do not need permission for anything. She stared at him, blinking slowly. He saw the conflict in her eyes, the desire to obey, the fear of freedom, and the curiosity about what it meant to truly be independent. He realized that her journey would be long and difficult, and that patience would be essential. Gradually, she began small experiments in freedom. She left her room without asking, walked to the kitchen to prepare her own meal, and even took small walks outside the apartment complex. Each time she returned, her posture was tense, but she had a quiet pride in her eyes. She was learning, in her own way, what it meant to exist without obligation. One afternoon, he noticed her staring out the window, tail flicking nervously. What are you thinking? He asked. She hesitated before answering. I am thinking of what it means to serve. I am used to serving, but I am not sure if serving without fear is possible. He nodded slowly. Serving does not have to mean fear. It can mean choice, loyalty, and respect. True service is given freely, not demanded. Her eyes widened slightly, and for the first time, he saw a glimmer of understanding. She was beginning to question what she had always believed. She was learning that obedience was not the only way to exist. Despite these small breakthroughs, fear remained. She would flinch at unexpected sounds, hide in corners during thunderstorms, and hesitate whenever someone came to the door. He did his best to reassure her, speaking calmly and gently, offering explanations before actions. Over time, she began to trust his voice, his tone, and even his presence. But deep down, he knew that trust would take months, perhaps years, to fully grow. One evening, as he returned home from work, he found her waiting by the door. She had prepared a simple meal, rice, vegetables, and a small portion of protein. She placed it carefully on the table, stepping back with her hands folded. I thought this might be acceptable, she said softly. He studied the meal and then her expression. It is acceptable, he replied. But more importantly, it is yours to prepare for yourself, not for me. Her ears twitched, and she nodded slowly. The smallest smile appeared on her lips, almost invisible, but it was there. A tiny spark of independence, growing slowly but surely as the week came to an end. He realized how much progress she had made, yet also how fragile it still was. She was learning to live without fear, to make choices, and to see that she was more than an object of obedience. He understood that the road ahead would require patience, understanding, and constant reassurance. That night, she settled into her room for sleep. He glanced at her from the doorway. She was curled under the blankets, tail wrapped loosely around her legs, eyes closed but still tense. He quietly whispered, "You are safe. You are free." Somewhere deep inside, he hoped that one day she would believe him. Not just hear the words, but feel them in her bones. For now, she was still learning, still cautious, still trapped in habits of fear. But each day, each small choice, was a step toward something better, and he promised himself, silently, that he would never let her forget the meaning of freedom, the value of choice, and the possibility of living without fear. The days continued quietly, filled with small victories, cautious steps, and tiny smiles. He knew that this was just the beginning, but for the first time, he allowed himself to believe that trust, understanding, and true companionship might be possible. Over time, the man noticed small changes in her behavior. She was beginning to move through the apartment with less hesitation, though the careful precision in every motion still remained. When she walked into the kitchen, she no longer froze at sudden noises or flinched at his presence. Instead, she started to look around the room, studying objects, noticing small details, and occasionally even humming softly to herself. It was the first time he had heard her hum since she arrived. The sound was quiet, almost hesitant, but it carried a sense of curiosity and wonder. One morning, he decided to take her outside for a walk. The city streets were bustling, filled with people going about their day, yet she held his hand lightly, almost as if she was afraid to let go, but also unsure of the connection. He could feel her tension, but he also sensed a growing curiosity in her steps. She was exploring the world not as a place of fear, but as a space that could be hers to move through. "You can walk faster if you want," he said gently. She looked up at him, ears twitching nervously. "Faster?" "Yes," he said with a smile. "You don't have to be afraid. The world is not dangerous here." She hesitated, then adjusted her pace slightly. Every step was cautious, but each one was her choice. He realized then that freedom was something she had never truly experienced. Her life before had been dictated by others, controlled by fear, and now every small act of independence was both thrilling and terrifying for her. Back in the apartment, he introduced her to small responsibilities, not as obligations, but as opportunities for choice. He asked her to help with simple tasks around the house, folding laundry, watering plants, organizing books, but always emphasized that she could choose what she wanted to do. Some days she helped willingly, smiling faintly as she worked. Other days she preferred to sit quietly, reading or watching the city through the window. Each choice was a small victory, a step toward understanding that usefulness could come from her own decisions, not just from obedience. One afternoon, he brought home a stack of books. They were simple stories at first, tales of adventure, friendship, and courage. He handed them to her and said, "You can read any of these. You don't have to, but they might help you see that there's more to life than following orders." She looked at the books with curiosity and hesitation. Slowly, she picked one, opened it, and began to read. At first, her voice was barely audible, but as she read, it grew stronger. He watched her, fascinated by the way her eyes moved over the words, how her ears twitched at the sound of her own voice. Reading became a ritual for her, a small act of freedom and self-expression. Evening conversations became another important step in her growth. She began to ask questions, not about rules, not about commands, but about the world. "Why do humans celebrate birthdays?" she asked one night, curling her tail around her legs. "Because it marks another year of life," he explained. "It's a way to celebrate growing older, learning, and living." She tilted her head, absorbing the information. "And do you enjoy it?" "I do," he replied with a smile. "It reminds us that life is precious and that we have choices in how we spend our time." Her eyes shone with a mixture of curiosity and wonder. She asked more questions over the following days about seasons, city life, and even small customs he took for granted. Each question was a sign that she was starting to engage with the world on her own terms, not just as a cautious observer, but as a participant. Despite these breakthroughs, fear still lingered. Storms terrified her, loud noises made her jump, and unfamiliar visitors caused her to retreat. But even in these moments, she was beginning to trust him more. She would stay in the room rather than hide in a corner. She would ask before leaving instead of running away. Each act of trust, however small, was a victory for both of them. One afternoon, as he was preparing a simple meal, she approached with a basket of vegetables she had picked from a small garden patch outside. "I wanted to try making something for us," she said softly. He looked at the basket, then at her. "You don't have to, but I appreciate it," he said warmly. She nodded, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. Together, they prepared the meal. She chopped carefully, measuring ingredients while he guided her gently without taking control. For the first time, he noticed her smile, small but genuine, as she worked. There was pride in her expression, a sense of accomplishment not tied to obligation but to choice. As days passed, he noticed her learning new things independently. She experimented with recipes, arranged the apartment in ways that made her feel comfortable, even started small projects like planting flowers by the window. Each project was a step toward understanding that she had the power to shape her environment and her life. One night, she sat across from him, a notebook open on her lap. "I want to write," she said quietly. "I have thoughts, but I do not know how to express them." He smiled and handed her a pen. "Write anything. There are no rules here." For hours she wrote, stopping occasionally to think, then continuing. When she finally closed the notebook, she looked up at him with a mixture of pride and vulnerability. "I think I am beginning to understand myself," she whispered. He nodded, understanding the depth of her words. This was more than learning independence. It was discovering identity. For the first time, she was seeing herself not as someone who needed permission, not as someone who existed to serve, but as a being with thoughts, feelings, and choices. Their conversations deepened, too. She began to express her opinions, share stories from her past carefully, and even laugh at small jokes. Her laughter was rare but genuine, and each time it filled the apartment with a warmth that had been missing for years. He realized that connection could not be forced. It grew slowly, nurtured by patience, understanding, and respect. One day she paused while helping him clean. "I think I understand what you meant by service," she said quietly. "It is not only about obedience. It is about caring, willingly, about choosing to help because one wants to, not because one fears." He smiled, a sense of relief washing over him. "Exactly," he said. "True service is given freely, not demanded. It is a choice, not a command." Her ears twitched as she absorbed his words. Slowly, she began to apply this understanding to her actions. She helped because she wanted to, not because she felt compelled. She cooked meals because it made her feel useful and connected, not because she thought it was expected. She cleaned, organized, and nurtured the apartment, not out of fear, but out of a desire to contribute to a shared life. One quiet evening, as the city lights glimmered through the windows, he watched her sit by the window, tail curling loosely, reading a book she had chosen herself. She looked content, at peace, yet still cautious, a delicate balance of independence and lingering fear. He realized how far she had come, and yet how much more growth awaited. He knew that the journey was far from over. There would be setbacks, moments of doubt, and days when fear would overshadow confidence. But for the first time, he truly believed that she could learn to live freely, make her own choices, and understand that her worth was not tied to obedience or fear in that moment. He felt a profound sense of responsibility and hope. He had not only provided shelter and safety, but had also become a guide, a teacher, and a friend. And she, in turn, was learning that life could be more than survival, more than servitude. It could be filled with choices, trust, and connection. As the night grew quiet, she closed her book and turned toward him. "Thank you," she whispered. He shook his head gently. "You do not need to thank me. You are learning to live, to choose, and that is what matters." Her ears twitched, and for the first time he saw a glimmer of understanding in her eyes. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. She was beginning to see that freedom, trust, and service could coexist not as obligations, but as choices made willingly. And so, the days continued. Each moment, each small choice, each quiet victory became a building block for a life that neither of them could have imagined before. She was learning to be herself, and he was learning what it meant to guide without controlling. For the first time, Both of them understood that true connection was not about ownership or fear. It was about choice, respect, and the willingness to grow together. Time passed, and she was slowly learning to understand herself. Yet one idea remained deeply rooted in her mind: the notion of service. It was a concept she had carried for years, one that had defined how she viewed the world. To her, serving someone had always meant safety, purpose, and a way to prove her worth. Now, in the quiet apartment with the man who had shown her kindness, she began to question what it truly meant. One afternoon, she approached him as he sat reading. Her ears twitched nervously, and her tail flicked slightly against the floor. I want to serve you," she said softly. The words were careful, almost hesitant, as if speaking them might summon disapproval or disappointment. He looked up, startled. He had known this day might come, but hearing it made him pause. "Serve?" he asked gently. "What do you mean by that?" Her amber eyes were steady, yet cautious. "I do not know how to explain it. I wish to help. To be useful. To repay you for taking care of me?" He closed the book slowly, setting it aside. He wanted to be careful with his words, knowing that any misstep could confuse her. "I do not need repayment," he said. "You are not my property. You do not owe me anything." She tilted her head slightly, ears lowering. "But I wish to. I feel that this is my way to exist, to be valued." He understood then that her idea of service was not about control or ownership. It was about gratitude, loyalty, and the desire to contribute meaningfully. Her past had taught her that survival came through obedience and usefulness. Now, she was applying that same instinct in a space where it was no longer demanded but chosen. Over the following days, he decided to approach the topic carefully. He encouraged her to explore what service could mean when it was freely given. Together, they experimented with small acts of help. She began organizing the apartment in ways that pleased her. Preparing meals she chose herself, and even helping him with tasks he had not asked her to do. Each act was her choice, not a requirement. One morning, she presented a tray of breakfast without him asking. "I thought you might like this," she said quietly, placing it on the table. He studied the tray, and then her face. "This is lovely," he said warmly, "and I can see that you enjoyed making it too." She blinked, surprised. I did enjoy it," she asked, almost as if discovering the idea for the first time. "Yes," he replied. "You are learning that serving can be about joy, not obligation." That simple concept seemed to resonate deeply within her. She began to experiment more, finding small ways to help without fear. She planted flowers by the window, chose decorations for her room, and even suggested ways to improve their shared space. Each contribution was met with gentle encouragement, reinforcing that her service was meaningful because it was voluntary. Not enforced, she also began to reflect on her past, understanding how deeply her experiences had shaped her. At night, she would sit quietly in her room, sometimes writing in her notebook, sometimes staring at the city lights outside. The man would occasionally join her, speaking softly about life, choices, and the value of independence. She listened carefully, absorbing every word, learning that respect, trust, and service could coexist when given freely. One afternoon, while they were arranging books on a shelf together, she paused and looked at him. "I think I am beginning to understand," she said softly. "Serving is not just doing what someone asks. It is choosing to help because one cares, because one wants to contribute. It is an act of respect, not fear." He nodded, smiling. "Exactly. True service comes from the heart, not obligation. It is freely given, and that makes it meaningful." Her eyes shone with a mix of realization and wonder. For the first time, she seemed to grasp that her worth was not tied to obedience, but to intention, choice, and the desire to contribute. She was discovering that her desire to serve could coexist with independence, creating a balance she had never known before. This understanding began to change their daily life. She took initiative, not because she feared consequences, but because she wanted to. She prepared meals, cleaned, and organized, but also pursued her own interest: reading, walking in the park, or simply observing the world outside. She began to smile more, laugh more, and even speak more freely. The cautious, reserved woman who had arrived weeks earlier was gradually transforming into someone confident in her own choices. The man, too, felt the shift. He saw that her desire to serve was no longer a burden on her. It was a source of pride and connection. He realized that service, when given willingly, was a powerful expression of respect and care. He began to rely on her insights and help, not because he needed control, but because they were now partners in life, each contributing in ways that strengthened the other. One evening, she approached him with a small handmade gift, a simple decoration she had crafted from materials she found around the apartment. "I wanted to do this for you," she said quietly, presenting it. He took it gently, examining the careful work. "This is wonderful," he said, "and it shows something important. You chose to do this, not because I asked, but because you wanted to." Her ears twitched, and her tail flicked lightly. "Yes," she admitted softly. "I wanted to express appreciation, not obligation." It was a turning point. She had learned that her acts of service could be meaningful because they were freely given, not because they were required. She was beginning to understand the difference between submission and contribution, fear and choice, obligation and respect. As the days passed, she grew more confident in her role, not as a servant, but as a partner. She began offering suggestions, taking initiative, and expressing herself more openly. She learned to balance her desire to help with her right to make choices, creating a harmony that neither she nor the man had fully expected. Their conversations deepened as well. She asked about life beyond the apartment, about human customs, emotions, and relationships. He answered patiently, explaining without judgment, encouraging her to think critically and explore ideas on her own. She listened carefully, sometimes questioning, sometimes reflecting, and always learning. One quiet evening, as they sat together watching the sunset, she spoke softly. "I think I understand now," she said. "To serve is not to obey blindly. To serve is to care, to contribute, and to choose willingly. It is respect. It is love in a way I never knew before." He smiled, touched by her insight. "Yes, that is exactly it. And the most important part is that you are choosing it. Not because you must, but because you want to." Her ears twitched, and she leaned slightly closer. "I am beginning to believe that I have worth. Not because of what I do, but because of who I am. And yet, I can still choose to help, to give, and to contribute. That feels right." It was a profound moment for both of them. She had come a long way from the cautious, fearful woman who had arrived at his door. She was learning that independence and service could coexist, that choice and contribution were not mutually exclusive, and that true connection was built on mutual respect, understanding, and care. In the following weeks, this new understanding became evident in every aspect of their life. She continued to take initiative, express her thoughts, and contribute to their shared environment. Yet she also pursued personal interests, spending time alone when she wished, exploring hobbies, and learning new skills. The balance between service and independence grew stronger each day, creating a partnership built on trust, choice, and mutual respect. The man watched these changes with a mixture of pride and awe. He realized that he had not only provided shelter and safety, but had also guided her toward understanding her own worth and the true meaning of service. She was no longer a fearful observer of the world. She was an active participant, contributing freely, learning constantly, and discovering herself in ways that were both inspiring and humbling. One evening, she approached him, her tail swaying lightly, ears alert. "I want you to know," she said softly, "that my desire to serve is not about obligation. It is about trust, respect, and the choice to contribute. I want to help, not because I must, but because I care." He nodded, his heart warmed. "I understand. And that is all I could ever ask for. True service is freely given, and you are giving it in the most meaningful way possible." She smiled faintly, a mixture of pride and contentment in her expression. For the first time, She felt fully seen, not as someone who must obey, but as someone who could choose, contribute, and connect. And in that quiet moment, the man realized that their journey had transformed both of them. She had learned the meaning of freedom, choice, and meaningful service. He had learned the importance of patience, understanding, and allowing someone to grow at their own pace. Together, they had discovered a partnership that was built not on ownership, fear, or obligation, but on trust, respect, and the voluntary acts of care that made life richer for both. Time had passed since she first arrived at his apartment, and the woman with fox-like features had grown in ways neither of them had imagined. The cautious, fearful figure who had hesitated at every step had transformed into someone who understood both her own worth and the meaning of voluntary service. Yet, even with this growth, the journey was far from complete. The man realized that true partnership required more than guidance. It required trust, understanding, and the freedom to choose every day. One morning, she approached him while he was reading in the living room. Her ears twitched nervously, and her tail flicked lightly against the floor. "I have been thinking," she said softly, "about what it means to stay, to belong somewhere willingly, rather than because I feel I must." He closed his book, giving her his full attention. "Go on," he encouraged. She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I could leave. I have the right to live my own life, to explore the world beyond these walls. But I do not wish to leave. Not because I owe you anything, but because I choose to be here to help, to share life with you." Her words were slow and deliberate, yet they carried a depth of understanding he had never expected. This was not the timid, fearful girl who had arrived weeks ago. This was someone who had discovered her own agency, who understood the meaning of choice, respect, and care. He felt a warmth in his chest he could not describe. "I understand," he said softly. "And I am grateful. Grateful that you choose to stay, not because you must, but because you want to." She nodded, ears twitching slightly in acknowledgement. "I have learned much," she continued, "about freedom, trust, and the meaning of serving someone willingly. And I wish to continue learning with you." From that day, their life together became a balance of shared responsibilities and mutual respect. She continued to help around the apartment, not out of obligation, but because it made her feel useful and connected. She prepared meals, organized spaces, and offered suggestions not as a requirement, but as a gift freely given. Each act carried a sense of pride, joy, and intention. At the same time, she pursued her own interests. She explored hobbies, spent time reading, walked through the city streets to observe people, and sometimes simply sat by the window watching the world pass by. Each of these moments was her choice, a reaffirmation that she could live independently while still participating in a shared life. One evening, he noticed her arranging books on the shelf with care. "You've really made this space your own," he said, smiling. She looked up, tail flicking lightly. "I wanted it to reflect who I am," she replied, "and also to make it welcoming for both of us." It struck him then how far she had come. She had learned that serving did not diminish her independence. Rather, it enhanced it. She contributed to their shared life because she chose to, not because she feared consequences. And in doing so, she discovered a sense of purpose and identity that had long been missing. Their conversations became deeper, richer, and more personal. She began sharing her thoughts, reflections, and ideas openly. She spoke of her past, the lessons it had taught her, and the fears she was learning to overcome. He listened patiently, offering guidance only when necessary, and always emphasizing her ability to choose for herself. One day, as they sat together on the small balcony overlooking the city, she turned to him with a gentle expression. "I have realized something," she said softly. "Service, in its truest form, is not about doing what someone else wants. It is about understanding, caring, and acting willingly, and it is more meaningful when it comes from the heart." He nodded, touched by her insight. "Exactly," he said. "And you have learned that beautifully. You have discovered that service can coexist with freedom, choice, and self-respect." Her ears twitched, and she smiled faintly. "Yes, and I feel stronger because of it. I feel like I belong somewhere, not because I am required to, but because I choose to. And that choice, it makes me feel alive. From that day forward, their life continued in a rhythm of mutual trust and partnership. She no longer flinched at sudden sounds or hesitated at minor decisions. She had grown confident in her choices, learning to trust herself as much as she trusted him. Her acts of service became meaningful expressions of care, and his guidance became a steady support for her independence. Together, they developed a routine that balanced shared responsibilities and personal freedom. Mornings were often spent preparing meals together, experimenting with new recipes, or tending to small indoor plants she had started growing. Afternoons were for reading, walks, or quiet reflection. Evenings were spent talking, sharing insights, or simply enjoying each other's presence. Every action, every decision was guided by choice, respect, mutual understanding. She also began to help him in ways that surprised him. She noticed when he was tired, prepared tea without being asked, or suggested small improvements around the apartment. Each gesture was voluntary, but it carried a depth of thought and care that reflected her growing understanding of true partnership. One evening, as they prepared a simple dinner, she paused and looked at him. "I want you to know," she said softly, "that my presence here is not because I am required. It is because I wish to contribute, to share life with you, and to continue growing. I choose this." Freely, he smiled, a sense of relief and gratitude washing over him. "I understand," he replied, "and that is exactly what I hoped for." True partnership is built on choice, not obligation. "You have chosen beautifully." Her tail flicked lightly, ears attentive. "And I have learned that caring for someone does not diminish my freedom. It strengthens it. By choosing to serve, I am also choosing myself, my values, and my life." This understanding marked the final stage of her transformation. She had moved from fear and obligation to choice and purpose. She had learned that service could be meaningful only when given freely, that independence and care could coexist, and that true connection was built on mutual respect. Their bond deepened as a result. She no longer followed his instructions out of fear or habit. She acted out of care, respect, and genuine desire. And he, in turn, learned the importance of patience, empathy, and allowing someone to grow at their own pace. Together, they had created a life that was neither dominated by fear nor restricted by obligation, but enriched by choice, trust. In shared understanding, in quiet moments, they would sit together. Reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point, she would speak of her past, acknowledging the lessons it had taught her, while he would share observations about life, trust, and human nature. Each conversation was a reminder of how far they had come and how much further they could grow together. One evening, as the city lights shimmered through the window, she turned to him with a gentle expression. "I am grateful," she said softly. "Not because I must be, but because I choose to be. And that choice, it makes me feel whole, respected, and free." He reached out, placing a hand gently on hers. "And I am grateful too," he said. "Grateful for your presence, your trust, and the care you give willingly. This partnership we have built, it is more meaningful than anything I could have imagined." She smiled faintly, ears twitching with a quiet contentment. "Yes," she whispered. "Together, we have learned that freedom, trust, and service can coexist. That choice is the most important gift of all." And so, their life continued not as one dominated by ownership or obligation, but as a partnership built on respect, choice, and genuine care. She served willingly, not out of fear, but out of love and appreciation. He guided patiently, not out of control, but out of support and understanding. Together, they discovered a harmony that neither could have found alone as they moved through each day. Each small task, each quiet moment, they were reminded of the journey that had brought them here. A journey from fear to trust, from obedience to choice, from survival to meaningful living. She had learned to serve not because she was required, but because she wanted to. And he had learned that true care meant guiding without controlling, supporting without demanding. In the end, The fox-like woman and the man had built a life that was not defined by rules, obligations, or fear, but by trust, choice, and mutual respect. Each day was a testament to the power of patience, understanding, and the beauty of freely given care. And as they sat together, quietly sharing the simple moments of life, they both understood that this was only the beginning of a lifelong partnership, one built on freedom, trust, and the voluntary acts of service that made their lives richer, fuller, and more meaningful than either could have imagined.